Hi, my name is Dave and welcome to my Solidity Basics series. Here I will guide you through the fundamentals that you need to become a blockchain developer. At the end of this series, you will be able to understand how Solidity works and you will be ready to move on and learn more advanced topics to code smart contracts. So you can find all the videos on Skillshare and I left a link in the description. Please like and subscribe so more people can find those videos and start their blockchain development journey. Hi and welcome to the lesson about conditionals and loops. So conditional statement and loops are a very important part and they are the bulk of making decisions and make automations through code. So what are conditionals? Conditionals handle decisions. So basically a conditional statement will return true or false. And then based on the value returned, we can trigger some other type of instruction. Let's say that we want to check that an address on a contract is the owner of the contract before we trigger a specific function, or in a more simpler and abstract way, let's say we have a variable and we want to check that the variable is bigger than another one. For example, when you want to send coins to another address, well, we will have to check that the balance is bigger than the requested amount, right? So in that case, then if you have enough balance, then you can trigger the function and send coins. So let's check how we do conditionals. So in Solidity, conditionals are simply the if and else statement. So just the regular syntax would be if some conditions are met, then trigger something. Else, if they're not met, trigger something else. So let's create a contract that we can call conditionals. Let's write it the same, or try the same name on of the file, conditionals, and we'll write a function in it. So let's say that we want to have a function that passes a number and checks if this number is bigger or smaller than a specific value. And if it's bigger, returns true, and if it's smaller, returns false. It could be a very simple function just to see how the if statement can work. So we'll make a function, we can call it big number. Big number. And we said we wanted to pass a number in it, so we can check it against a preset, another preset value. So it will be a uint, and we can call it number. This function, we want to have it public because we want access to it. So this function is going to do everything inside the function itself. So we can write it as pure, and we're going to return something. So we'll type returns. Now usually we return, up to now we just return a uint. Today we're going to return a different value because we said that conditional statements return a true or false value. And if you remember from one of the first lessons, true and false values are booleans. So it's going to return a bool. It's going to return a bool variable. So how do we write the code? We'll start with the keyword if, and then in the parentheses we're going to have the conditions. So now we want to check that the parameter that we pass is, if the parameter that we pass is smaller or bigger compared to a number. So let's say that we want to check if the number that we pass is bigger than 5. This is just an arbitrary number that we set now as an example. Then we'll have the brackets after the if statement, and in the brackets we're gonna type the instructions that are gonna be executed if this condition is met. So let's say that we pass a number that is 10, the function is gonna check, is 10 bigger than 5? Yes, and then return something. So in this case we said we return a bool variable, so we are simply gonna return true. And else is a second keyword that indicates what is going to be returned in case the condition is not met, brackets, and inside the brackets we will return false. So what this function does, again, we pass a parameter in it, we check if the parameter is bigger than 5, if it's true, it's going to return true, and if it's false, it's going to return false. And then after this, based on what we get back, we could trigger something else. For example, if this function returns true, then call another function or add some other data. So let's test it out. We can compile it, Control S. It's gonna give me an error because I didn't change the compiler, I knew it. So let's make sure that we put the version 8 compiler. Then we can compile it. And it looks like I forgot something else. Let's read through the error. As usual, I forget. I work a lot in Python, and Python doesn't really use semicolons at the end of the instructions, so I always forget. Let's try again. Okay, now this time compiled it correctly. Let's deploy it. We'll have a nice new address. We deployed successfully, and let's check what's in the contract. And here we have a function named big number and accepts a uint. So if we put 4, which is smaller than 5, it should return false, which indeed does. And if we put 7, it will return true. So this is a very abstract and simple way to see how these conditionals work. But that's really just the basic of conditional statements. Now let's talk about loops. So loops are a very important part because they allow you to basically iterate through multiple data all at once, and then you can combine it with conditional statements like if to trigger some instructions. So let's try to do this. We want to create a function that reads an array and count how many elements are in that array. So how will we do that? We will have to start typing an array, right? So how do we place the array? We type the type of array, uint. It's gonna be a dynamic array, public. And let's call it values. So we can place some values in it, or you could just write a function that first add the value like we made in the previous lesson, and then maybe counts through them. So let's just write some values in it. So we write 10 numbers in it. And now we want to have a function that iterates through these numbers and through these elements and count how many of them are in there. So let's do that. We'll write a function here that we can call count numbers or count elements. And this function is not going to take any parameter because it's just a function that does something without us inputting. It's going to be public because we want to access it, and this one does something on the blockchain. This one reads off the blockchain because this array is on the blockchain, right? So this one is going to be a view function, and it's going to return a uint because we want to loop and iterate through this array, count how many elements in it, and then we want to get the number back. So it's going to give us a uint back. Now this function has to start with a variable that keeps tracks of the loops. So, or rather, that keep track of the items in the array. So this is defined usually as a count variable, and it's going to be a number. So it's going to be a uint that we can call count, and we can just leave it like this because it's when it starts is initialize as 0. You could write count equals 0, but we can just initialize it like this, so we see how this works. And then we have to write the loop. In this case, we're going to use a for loop. So a for loop basically follows the instructions that we give and loop through how many times we want. So how we syntax that, we put the parentheses here, and we have to tell the loop where to start. So we'll have a uint that we can call I, that could stand for index, but remember that these numbers are arbitrary. You can call them however you want. And we'll start I equals 0. This means, hey, start the count of your loops from 0. And then we want to write some sort of conditional here. Say, hey, keep going until something happens. And in this case, we're going to keep going until the index of the count of the loop matches how many elements are in the array. So for this, we use a method on the array. That is the array dot length. Length basically returns how many items are in there. So if we do I less than values dot length, then this means keep going until the index of the for loop matches how many items are in the array. And then at that point, after that, after each loop, we'll do I++. I++ means at the end of each loop, add one to this count. So we'll go through this element, and then we add 1, and then we go through this element and add 1 until we match the length. This I could also be I equal I+1. That's what the plus means. It basically means add 1 to the previous count. But we can write it like this. It looks a little bit more efficient. And then we'll have the brackets. And so this is just the instruction that tells how the loop should work inside this structure here. But then inside the brackets, we'll say what it does each time it loops through. So what do we want to do? We want to count how many. So we want to do that each time we loop through, we add 1 to the count here. So we can keep track of how many elements are in there. So how is that going to work? We're going to do uint. We're just going to do count plus plus. This means add 1 to whatever is in count. So if count now is equal to 3, well, after the next loop is going to be 4 and so on. And then outside the brackets, we'll return the value of count. So this means once the loop is done, return the count. And I was forgetting the semicolon too. All right, let's compile it with Control S and see if we can test it. So we'll destroy this contract, we'll redeploy it. And now we have a few more elements. So here we have values, which is the array that we created. Remember how we can use this to access the array, right? So let's say that we want to see what number is in position 5. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it should be 6. So if we put position 5, it gives us 6. But now we don't know how many elements are in there. So how do we check it? We wrote a function for that. We do count element, and the loop is going to tell us, hey, there are 10 elements in there. So it's going to loop through each one of them and keep track of it. Now if we add a few of them, we redeploy the contract and test it again. Boom, now we have 12. So there is a very simple for loop to keep track of something, right? Now let's combine a for loop with the conditional statement. So let's say that we still have this array, but we want to count how many of these numbers are bigger than 5, for example. Then we will write a function that combines the two of them. So how do we do that? We'll write the function and we can call it, let's just call it how many. We'll call it how many. And this function doesn't need again any parameter because it's just going to do everything internally. And it's public function. It's view because we're going to access the array. And it's going to return a uint as well because we want to return how many numbers are bigger than 5. Oops. Uint. So now we'll need to define a couple more variables again in here. So we are trying to count something. So we'll have to use another count variable just like we did before. Uint, and we call it count again. And as just as before, it's going to start from 0. And then we can write the loop. So the for loop, it's going to be pretty much the same as before, because we're still going to loop through all the values in there. So we can just copy this previous for loop that we wrote and paste it in here. Now, we can do it in a couple of ways for the conditional statement. We could simply take the value of I and compare it to a hard-coded conditional. So we could do if I we'll have to extract the content of I, right? So the content of I will be what's in the index of the array. So value I will do. So if what's in the array it's bigger than 5, well, then do something. And what do? We add a number here to count. And else, well, actually the else is not going to do anything in this case because we don't really need to do anything else in case the value is not bigger than 5. But we are still going to return a uint. So we want to return, after the loop is done, we want to return the count. And let's not forget those here too. Okay, so this function is going to loop through the array, and if the value that reads from the array is bigger than 5, it's going to add it to count. So in this case, how many numbers are bigger than 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers are bigger than 5. So when we call this function, we should get 7 as a result. So let's try to compile it, see if it goes. It doesn't. What did I do here wrong? I misspelled the name of the array. See? I typed value while the name of the array is values. So let's compile it again with Control S. This time it worked. We can deploy it. And let's call the function how many numbers are bigger than 5, and here we get 7. So our conditional works. We could do it in another way.